it's so great to be back in Waterloo. I have to tell you, Mayor Hart, we have spent some time together, but I also know about his work from afar. He has really been one of the great American mayors, and what I know from the mayors I know in California, for example, and some other places, because he's relatively newly elected, is that he's looked at as someone who is a real voice for Waterloo, but places like Waterloo around the country. He has been a real voice for what we need to do in terms of investing in long overlooked communities. You've been a real leader here in Waterloo in your tenure around reducing crime, investing in the economy and small businesses of America, and I just want to thank you for your friendship and being a part of this. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all on this weekday in the middle of the day for coming out to be here and have this conversation. I really appreciate you. And so I'm going to share with you a couple of my thoughts and plans, and then I'm going to stop talking so I can hear from you. And we'll pass around the microphone because I really would love to get your thoughts and concerns and questions and feedback, because you know what, we're all in this together. We're all in this together. So, you know, let's get started. I think we all know this is an inflection moment in the history of our country, right? This is a moment in time where we are each being asked and required to look in a mirror and ask the question being, who are we? And I think we all know part of the answer to that question is we are better than this. So this is a moment in time that we must fight for the best of who we are, and fight, of course, we will. And here's the thing that we have to remember. Fighting is not new for us. There is nothing we have ever gained by way of progress as a country without a good fight. We are up for a good fight. We were born out of a good fight. And so that is what is before us right now. And I know that we as a people are prepared to meet the challenge. And you know, I'll tell you, I come from a family of fighters. My parents actually met when they were active in the civil rights movement. So my sister and I, we joke, we grew up surrounded by a bunch of adults who spent full-time marching and shouting for justice. Right? And among the heroes were people like Thurgood Marshall and others who understood the power of those of us who fight for justice in making sure that it is real, by making sure it also is clear in the courtrooms of our country so the laws will reflect our values. And in fact, that's why I wanted to become a lawyer. As you know, I spent a large part of my career as a prosecutor, and there the fight continued. As a prosecutor, I fought for sexual assault victims who were experiencing some of the worst of human behavior, and I knew that there was an important point to be made in a fight for justice to give them dignity and justice. In my career, I have fought for homeowners who were being taken advantage of by the biggest banks in the United States, and won $20 billion for the homeowners who were the subject of predatory lending practices. In my career, I have fought for communities that were the subject of toxic chemical dumping and oil spills by some of the biggest oil companies in our country, and we won. I have fought for students who were the subject of predatory lending practices by for-profit colleges and put them out of business. These are the kinds of fights we have had, and we have won. And I'm going to tell you guys, with the many new friends here, these fights are not new for me. And it's not just been the subject of some lovely speech that I talk about this. It's not just about some theory or some debate on a stage that I talk about this. I have a track record of fighting for families, for students, for communities, and winning. And so I say, I offer you that in the context of the fight before us, which is the fight to get Donald Trump out of the White House. And I'll tell you, we will win. we will win. So let's talk for a moment about that occupant of the current occupant of the White House. Let's talk about that, because it's important to put our meeting today in context, right? So let's talk about that. So this is a guy who ran for office on a campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," which of course asked a lot of us, well, again, exactly for whom? And back to what? Because it sounded like he was talking about going back to something, right? Back to what? Back before the Voting Rights Act? Back before the Civil Rights Act? Back before federal minimum wage? Back before Roe v. Wade? Because we're not going back. We're not going back. And so that being said, what we know is that we want to move forward, not go back. And to do that, we need to turn the page. We need to turn the page. And to successfully turn the page, I would argue, we must be able to successfully prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump. And it will take a prosecutor to do it. And we're working with quite a rap sheet. We're working with quite a rap sheet. Because let's think about it. He came in office making a bunch of promises to people. In particular, working people. And he betrayed people. He betrayed working people and working families when he passed that tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America, to the point that last year 60 of the biggest corporations in America paid no taxes. Who here paid no taxes last year? He betrayed people. He betrayed our values as Americans. When he has a policy that's about putting babies in cages and separating children from their parents in the name of border security, when in fact what it is a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government. And he has betrayed our national security. So you're hearing about the reports going on today about the whistleblower, but it's not new news to us, because let's remember, the President of the United States is also the Commander-in-Chief. And the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America has as one of her most important responsibilities the responsibility of keeping our nation secure, keeping the homeland secure, and leading with our values. But instead, what do we have in this guy? A so-called commander-in-chief who, on the subject of Russia's interference in the election of the presidency of the United States, prefers to take the word of the Russian president over the word of the American intelligence community. A so-called commander-in-chief who, on the subject of an American student who was tortured and later died, prefers to take the word of a North Korean dictator over the word of the American intelligence community. On the subject of a journalist who was assassinated, a journalist who had American credentials, prefers to take the word of a Saudi prince over the word of the American intelligence community. We need a new commander-in-chief. So let's get to work of fighting this campaign, and let us understand that part of the challenge we have before us and why we must turn the page is because we have had in the current occupant of the White House someone who has used the most powerful tool in the hands of the President of the United States, which is this microphone, in a way that has not been about a true display of strength. When he doesn't understand that one of the greatest powers that any one of us have is not based on who we beat down, it's based on who you lift up. But instead, we've had a fellow that has spent full time trying to sow hate and division among us. But what Donald Trump doesn't get, and why we will win, is he doesn't understand what we all know, which is that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And that is the strength of who we are. We know that. We know the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. However your last name is pronounced, wherever you grew up, whatever your race, whatever your gender, we know that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us, and that it is our unity that is our strength as a nation. And that's why we're going to win. And that's what our campaign is about. And y'all are looking at me, okay, Kamala, why do you say this? Why do you think we have so much more in common than what separates us? Well, I'll tell you. I know it based on every personal and professional experience I've had, and I know it based on what I call the 3 in the morning thought. Okay, y'all looking at me, where are you going with this? Okay. 3 o'clock in the morning thought. Some people refer to that as the witching hour. But you know, when you wake up in the middle of the night with that thought that's been weighing on you, right? Sometimes in a cold sweat. Well, for the vast majority of us, when we wake up thinking that thought, it is never through the lens of the party with which we're registered to vote. When we wake up thinking that thought, it is never through the lens of some simplistic demographic some pollster put us in. And when we wake up thinking that thought, it usually has to do with one of just a very few things. Our personal health, the health of our children, our parents. For so many, can I get a job, keep a job, pay the bills by the end of the month, retire with dignity? For so many of our students, can I pay off those student loans? For so many of our seniors, do I have to make a choice about whether I fill my prescription or fill my refrigerator? The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And that knowledge is the fuel of our campaign, and that's why we're going to win. Because I'm going to tell you, we're not going to win this election based on these extensive conversations that are about ideology. You know, where are you on the spectrum between being a socialist and a capitalist? I have not gone to one town hall where someone has asked me that question as the thing that's keeping them up at night. And we're not going to win in terms of what we want for leadership in looking in the rearview mirror and talking about how things used to be, and that maybe getting back to that will make us better. Because we got to move forward. What is going to be about winning is going to be about also the strength of our nation. And that's bringing people together around our commonalities with our ability also to talk about and address the issues that wake people up in the middle of the night. And so here's what I'm thinking about, and I'll share with you a few about what wakes people up in the middle of the night. Well, one of those things has to do with whether they can fill their prescription, whether they can afford to get their family member to get the kind of health care they need without going bankrupt, right? This is one of the biggest things that keeps people up at night. 1 in 4 Americans with diabetes cannot afford their insulin. I don't have to tell Iowa, there's a syringe that contains a drug that can save the life of someone who has OD'd from opioids, and that syringe can cost $4,000. I don't have to tell you the seniors that I know about here in this state, and so many, that have to drive up to Canada to get their prescription medication because it's too expensive to get it in our own country. So part of how we're dealing with the priorities of our campaign is saying, let's deal with that. So we've got a Medicare for All plan that says, We're going to cover everybody, including those with pre-existing conditions. We're going to extend coverage to vision and dental and hearing aids. We're going to make sure that the insurance companies can no longer charge copays and deductibles. We're going to make sure that middle-class families making less than $100,000 are not going to get an increased tax to pay for this. And we're going to make sure that you have choice. Because I'll tell you, Waterloo, I've been meeting with people on this all up and down our country, including this state. And they've said to me, Kamala, we like the Medicare for All plan, but don't take away our choice. Don't take away our choice between a private and a public plan. Don't take away our choice. So my plan says, I'm not taking your choice. You'll have a choice between a private plan or a public plan. But the insurance company is going to have to play by the rules or they don't play at all. What's keeping people up at night? Well, so many of our children went back to school over the course of the last 2 weeks, right? Doug and I, we have two 20-year-olds, so we don't have to worry about this anymore. But the number of our babies, collective, who in elementary, middle, and high school are going back to school to endure a drill, during which they are taught about how they need to hide in a closet or crouch in a corner in the event that there is a mass shooter roaming the hallways of their school. And they come home and they then ask us, why did we have to have that drill? And of course the response is, because there are a bunch of people in Washington, D.C. who have had no courage to agree that it's a false choice to say you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away. Have failed to have the courage to say, hey, fine if you want to go hunting, but we need reasonable gun safety laws in this country, including universal background checks and a renewal of the assault weapons ban. So I'm kind of done. And what I am saying is that after elected, with your help, please stand in Kamala's corner on caucus night. After we get elected, we're going to give the United States Congress 100 days to pull their act together on this and put a bill on my desk for signature. And if they do not, we're prepared to take executive action to put in place a comprehensive background check requirement and by executive action to ban the importation of assault weapons into our country. We got to take action. What wakes people up at night? What keeps them up in the middle of the night? Floods, hurricanes, wildfires. Here in Iowa, we know the number of farmers that lost a whole season of crops because of those floods. In California, my home state, I can't tell you the number of firefighters who were fighting a wildfire while their personal home was burning to the ground. Look at the hurricanes that have been devastating from coast to coast. What's keeping you up at night? It's called a climate crisis. And we need to take it seriously. Instead of these folks in Washington, D.C. who have been pushing science fiction instead of science fact, and that's why we have a Green New Deal that says we're going to focus on this as an economic issue, because guess what? Building up our infrastructure around water, Iowa knows that well, around investment in renewable energies, that's about job creation. We're going to deal with it in a way that says that we're going to pay attention to often overlooked communities and make sure that folks like our farmers, who are some of the most innovative people as a profession, are participating in leading this conversation around what we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this might be the prosecutor background in me telling you, but we're going to also recognize that, yeah, human behaviors are part of the problem, but the biggest part of the problem is those fossil fuel and big oil companies that have been getting away with polluting our environment with no consequence and accountability. I've taken them on before, and I'll do it again. So those are some of the things that keep people up at night. And you know, when people say that, you know, you want to upend systems, people talk about all that, guess what? If you can help people get a good night's sleep because we're addressing the things that keep them up, that's a big deal for America. And that's my focus. And that's my focus. And I want to deal with another issue that is starting to creep into this campaign, and it's the issue of electability. Let's just address that elephant in the middle of the room, or the donkey in the middle of the room in this case. You know, every office I've run for, people said, whether it was DA, whether it was Attorney General in a state of 40 million people where I ended up running the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice. Every race I have won, people said, oh, they're not ready for you. Nobody like you has done that before. It's not your time, it's not your turn. And every time I didn't listen, and we won. But I'm going to tell you the most important takeaway from that experience for me. The reason we won is because the American people didn't listen either. The American people know what is possible. Iowa, you have always been that kind of leader, where you know what is possible. You know what can be, unburdened by what has been. And that's what's before us in this election, which is to show what is possible based on the America we believe in. And in the America we believe in, we fight. We fight, and it's a fight born out of love of country. We fight based on the optimism of knowing that we have always been about getting to those ideals that were behind the writing of the Constitution of the United States and all of its amendments and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. We have always been in the business of fighting for where we know we can be, even if we've not seen it before. And so that's the fight that I see before us now. And I will tell you that when I travel our country, I feel so optimistic. Because, you know, people, you know, then there's the other thing that the pundits are doing, comparing 2020 to 2016. Hey, 2020 ain't no 2016. People are woke, also known as awake. And people are ready to fight. You know, when you hear the pundits talk about it, I say nope, because you know what happened? That morning after, November of 2016, people woke up and realized, oh, we can't take anything for granted. We got to be active, we got to participate. That's why you guys are all here with all the other things you could be doing with your time. And so I know together, Waterloo, we're going to get this done, and I cannot thank you enough for your time and your encouragement and the generosity of your support. So thank you very much. And with that, let's hear from you. I want to take some questions.
Question time. Who's got a question? First hand up. Gentleman's behind you with the mic.
Sure. As you know, the United States leads imprisonment per capita of the whole world. What's your thinking on mandatory minimum, 3 strikes you're out, prison reform, et cetera?
Great. So thank you. My parents, as I shared with you, were active in the civil rights movement. To be very candid with you, there is not a black man I know, be he a relative, a friend, or a coworker, who has not been the subject of some kind of profiling or excessive force. So when I became a prosecutor, it was a choice I made very consciously for 2 reasons. One, because I have, as I think we all do, but a very strong desire to make sure that people are safe. And so it was the work of, for example, for the large part of my career, taking on cases like child sexual assault and things of that nature. And I became a prosecutor because I also knew that the system needed to be reformed, has often been informed by racial bias, and that doing the reform work should be done from the inside as well as the outside. And so I'm proud of my career, which included creating some of the first in the nation initiatives that were around things like people who are arrested for drugs, getting them jobs. In the California Department of Justice, which, as I mentioned, was the second largest in the country, I created an initiative that required my special agents to wear body cameras and keep them on. Going forward, I've laid out a plan for reform of the criminal justice system that is about getting rid of mandatory minimums. I am also in favor of legalizing marijuana. I am also in favor of what we need to do around just ending the mass incarceration system. I can talk about the detail of that. Also what we need to do around accountability for law enforcement. Also what we need to do to shut down the private prison systems. And by association, these private detention facilities, like when I visited after the Miami debates, the first debates, I went down to a place in Florida called Homestead, where there is a private detention facility that your tax dollars are paying for, that currently houses 2,700 children. And when we tried to gain entry to the detention center, members of Congress went down. They wouldn't let us in. Private detention facility. Business model is what? Certain human beings are making a ton of money off of the incarceration of other human beings known as children. So immediately, private prisons, but also the private detention facilities, shut them down. And then what we need to do about a criminal justice system that has also got to have a conscious intention to hold families together as opposed to separate them. The issue, to get in more detail around what's happening, for example, with incarceration of women, is awful. We have places in our country that are still shackling women during childbirth if they're in prison. The work that we need to do around when women are, incarcerated, of paying attention to where their children are, because even if they committed a crime, they still have a natural desire to parent their children and need to have access to those children, and it cannot be a thing that is about lack of access in any real way because they don't have the financial resources to have the children come to them or even do the phone calls. You know, there are these for-profit organizations who run the phone system and make a ton of money off of like 1 minute of calls, so that families can't even maintain their relationship. So these are all the things I think about. And I could obviously go on and on. Thank you for the question.
All right, another question right there in the middle. Someone's coming right behind you with the mic, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Christine Carpenter, and I'm from the Beyond Pink team, the Cedar Valley's breast cancer group, and we're a member organization of the National Breast Cancer Coalition. And I'm here to thank you very, very much for signing the National Breast Cancer Coalition's public policy platform, which the platform has 3 goals. One is making sure that everyone has access to guaranteed access to quality, affordable, evidence-based health care, that research is transparent and accountable and has sufficient funding, and finally, that educated advocates are sitting at all the decision-making tables for policy, health care, that sort of thing. So thank you very, very much. I'm glad you did it with my colleague in New Hampshire.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll also tell you, for me, this is so personal. So my mother raised my sister and me, and she had 2 goals in her life: to raise her 2 daughters and end breast cancer. She was a researcher in breast cancer, and so I grew up with my mother, my entire life fighting for women's health issues, and knowing that there's so much about scientific research that has not been about funding the research in the way that it should around women's health issues, much less what we're doing to give women dignity in the healthcare system. And so it's very personal for me, and I thank you for your leadership, so thank you.
All right, we've got a question right over here in the black shirt, I believe.
Hi. So our current administration has done so much damage, in my opinion, within Congress, as far as separating Democrats and Republicans. And I love the idea of a 100-day deadline. However, I think most of us agree that as part of being an American, one of our values is having a Congress that works together to help all Americans. Do you have any specific plans on how to help rebuild those relationships so we start listening to one another instead of just always saying the other side is wrong?
That's a great point. And I couldn't agree with you more, and that's exactly where I'm coming from when I say that it is not only going to be the thing that is going to I believe, be the winning ingredient for our campaign. It is what I feel so deeply and I know is so critical if we're going to strengthen as a nation. We have to see that we have so much more in common than what separates us, regardless of the party with which we're registered to vote. I mean, on every issue I mentioned, we could talk about breast cancer, we could talk about health care, we could talk about those children of ours who are traumatized by those drills, we can talk about the issue of the climate crisis. Right? We can talk about all of these issues and know that these issues do not see party affiliation. They don't see where you live in terms of if it's a so-called red state or blue state. And you know, here's how I feel about it to the point of your, and I appreciate your question so much and every part of it. Part of what's wrong with what we have been experiencing these last few years is that in this rhetoric that's been hate-fueled and about, you know, fueling the fans of hate and about division, it's making us weaker as a country. And here's the thing. Part of it is not only just unhealthy for us in terms of what is our best quality. It also is taking away from the fact that we need to compete in a global world. We need to be investing in the American people, in the American family. And instead of having people point fingers at each other, let's unify the country around what we collectively want. Do you know in America today, almost half of American families cannot afford a $400 unexpected expense? Do you know in America today, in 99% of the counties in our country, if you're a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment? In America last year, 12 million people took out a loan of, on average, $400 from the payday lender at an interest rate often in excess of 300%. So part of what I'm saying is we need to change that. I'm offering what has been described as what will be the most significant and the biggest middle-class tax cut we've had in generations, which is that my plan is that for every family that's making less than $100,000, they'll receive a $6,000 tax credit that you can take home at up to $500 a month, which will be all the difference between getting through the end of the month or not. But these are the kinds of things that we have to be focused on, which is the things that wake people up at night, including can they get through the month with all of their bills getting paid. And I'll tell you, I have examples of where there is bipartisan work. Election security, again, the topic of the day. So I'm the only person in the race on the last debate stage that's on the Senate Intelligence Committee and Senate Homeland Security Committee. There, for the last 2 years before now, were only 2 members of the 100 members of the United States Senate who were together on intelligence and Homeland Security. Me and a Republican, with whom I agree on almost nothing, but this, which is that he and I are listening to the same information from our intelligence community about elections security and the need for us to reinforce America's election security system. And we looked at each other from across the table and said, we need to work on this together. And we did. And we have a bill that is a bipartisan bill to upgrade America's elections infrastructure. And to your point, Mitch McConnell will not put it on the floor for a vote. But I say that to say, also with a sense of optimism, there's bipartisan support for this. Now, people are playing political games, but if you get back to where we really are, we know we have these issues in common, and that we're all going to rise or fall together on it. On the issue of criminal justice reform, I want to end America's cash bail system, because it basically treats people with money differently than people without money, which means that if you don't have the money for bail, you sit in jail for days, weeks, months, and even years waiting to go to trial. But if you've got the money, you're out free as a bird, right? That's an economic justice issue as well as a criminal justice issue. Another fellow with whom I agree on almost nothing but this, Rand Paul, a Republican from Kentucky. Rand Paul and I are partners on this, right? And so I say that to say to you, there is a lot of common ground to be found. And I know it, and I've seen it. And to your point, we got to stop letting people play politics with the American life. Yeah, thank you.
All right, we got time for a couple more questions. I'm going to do one over here. Gentleman in the maroon shirt. Maroon, to the right.
My name is Eric Dunant, and I'm here from Waterloo. And what keeps people with disabilities up at night is our Medicaid crisis with our Medicaid privatization program. And that's not treating people with disabilities with the dignity that we deserve.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you are, when you become president,
Thank you.
when you become president, will you discontinue the waiver that allowed Iowa to be one of the states that put in place the Medicaid privatization program as it is in this state?
Yeah.
Because it needs to be rescinded.
I agree with you, and thank you for your leadership. And as you and I have discussed before, I've actually spoken out about Iowa's approach to this. It's wrong. And we've done a real disservice for a long time to our disability community. I'm the only candidate right now who has actually offered a whole platform and plan about what we need to do to support our disability community. And please, if you're interested in any more detail about any of my plans, I will shamelessly plug our website, www.kamalaharris.org. But on this issue, in particular, it's about, to your point, that there are so many members of our disability community that cannot afford wheelchairs, that cannot afford the medical devices that they need to be able to live with dignity and to be able to live with independence. My plan also includes what we need to do around support for economic equality for members of our disability community, around minimum wage and things of that nature, because you may know and you may not know, so many members of our disability community are doing this equal work for less pay. It's a big deal. It's a big issue in our country. Another part of my focus is with the use of technology that makes a lot of people's lives easier in some ways, that we have to get away from any policies that say, okay, this is how we can put members of our disability community to work. They can work from their homes, because no, it's not about isolating people. It's about integrating people and doing it around physical access and also access at every level. So I do care deeply about this, and I thank you for your leadership. Thank you.
All right, last question. Ma'am, right there in the pink.
Oh, I got you.
My name is Priscilla Neiman. I am from Waterloo. I am both an ACEs survivor and a Me Too survivor. So I fight like hell at the local level to get better health care for women and children, but also boys and men.
Yes.
And it is a rough, endless fight. And when black women are willing to talk to me, they say we don't even bother to go for help. This dismays me. I am trying to work together with people who will unite and say our systems are not working.
Yeah.
We are not serving a big part of our population.
That's right.
What are your policies on mental health?
Yeah.
For children and adults?
I'm glad you asked. How much time do you have? This is an issue I've worked on for years and years and years, on a variety of levels, and I'll just share with you a couple. One, the issue of trauma that is undiagnosed and untreated among our children is profound. Children who are exposed to violence, be it violence in their community or domestic violence. The trauma that comes with poverty, because let's be clear, poverty is trauma-inducing. And our failure to then recognize, diagnose, and treat that trauma, which leads to predictable behaviors, including our kids acting out, including a number of other things, which lead directly often into what we see in the criminal justice system. So I've done a lot of work in my background on that. I'd actually urge you to read a book if you've never, it's called The Deepest Well, which talks about some of the work that I've done actually in this regard, but national work from a real expert on it. So there is that. There is the work that we need to do that is around public education. My first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, attended my law school graduation. I have always believed that teachers are some of the most important members of our community and do God's work. And so I have a whole proposal that is about paying teachers their value, because right now I've met so many teachers here in Iowa and around the country who are working 2 and 3 jobs. 94% of the teachers in our public schools come out of their own pocket to help pay for school supplies. Teachers are paid on average 11% less than similarly educated professionals. So my plan is to do what will be the first in the nation ever, federal investment in closing the teacher pay gap. Here in Iowa, that will be $12,200 a year, to make sure that our teachers can afford to do it, make sure that we can recruit and retain teachers to do the work of focusing on our children. In terms of my broader education policy, to your point, it includes putting a nurse in every school. There is the piece that we also need to do about supporting parents. Because part of the failure is that when we talk about children, we tend to be kind of paternalistic about it and think like government can just come in and take care of those kids. No, those kids live in the context of the parents who love them. And we need to support the family to do what they have a natural desire to do, instead of just thinking we're going to come in and we know better for those children. And so that's also about what we need to do on a variety of issues that include affordable child care. So my plan is that no family should have to spend more than 7% of their income on child care. What we need to do around pre-K and early learning and universal pre-K, and a variety of other issues that are all addressed at the point that you're making in terms of the outcomes that we see if we don't address these issues. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for coming.
And thank you guys. And I want to thank you for the time. And I will see you again. I don't know if you heard, but I'm kind of planning to kind of live in Iowa. So, thanks, neighbors. Thank you.